Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer, or Jay Mortensen. I work for the Washington Trust as well. And I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists today. And as Alex said, we have some great panelists and a wide range of experiences in cultural resources. So we're really happy that they've all agreed to contribute today. We have Dr. Stephanie Toothman, former Associate Director of Cultural Resources Partnerships and Science for the National Park Service, Dr. Manish Chalana, Associate Professor at the Department of Urban Design and Planning at the University of Washington in Seattle. We have Stacia Morfin, owner and operator of Perce Tourism, and Allison Williams, City Manager for the City of Moses Lake. So I'm going to go ahead. We'll have the contact information up again at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share so we can see everybody's faces. And we're going to start with just a general intro to each panelist. And I'd like to ask each panelist to give a quick overview of their job responsibilities and a few words about how their job overlaps with preservation. And we'll start with Manish.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. As you heard, my name is Manish Chalana. I'm an associate professor in urban design and planning at UW. We have a historic preservation certificate program, which is a graduate certificate program, and much of my teaching is in that program. So with respect to my job has three components. One is teaching, one is research, and one is service. Much of my teaching happens in the certificate program, and I want to add here that more recently we have moved the certificate program out of our college to the university, which means anyone enrolled in the UW can participate and earn that certificate, but also people who are not enrolled in the university can sign up and earn the certificate as non-matriculate. So this is for those of you who are interested in historic preservation and don't have the time, consider this, talk to me. We can set you up, and I believe it's an 18 credit certificate program, so just something to think about. My research is mostly, of course, in the area of planning history / urban history and historic preservation. More recently, I've been exploring lenses of equity, social justice, to revisit historic preservation methodology as well as practice, and see how we have, how the field has shaped in the last 40, 50 years. And ultimately, the goal is for the field to become more equitable and represent histories and memories of all populations. So that is my interest in it. As far as service goes, services, I'd like make an effort to connect with the larger historic preservation community, all of you here. So I serve on the Landmarks Commission. I've been serving on the Seattle Landmarks Commission for 2 years. In addition to that, I also serve on a Beyond Integrity group at For Culture. So, and finally, I also serve on the National Council of Preservation Educators. They're called NCPE, and NCPE, is an organization of academics and professors who think about, shaping the field and curriculum. So I serve on that committee as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Manish. I'll go ahead and give a plug for that certificate program, which is one I went through. And also I'm honored to be able to serve with Manish on the Beyond Integrity group too. So we'll move next to Stacia. So a quick overview of your job responsibilities and a little bit about how it overlaps with preservation.
Tatsala, inam wanikwas kusnim kesnuat, soyapa wanikwas Stacia Morfin, tatspa'ain. What I said is good afternoon. My name is One Who Takes Care of Water, also known as Stacia Morfin. Welcome. I am owner and operator of Perce Tourism, LLC. I am a Nimipu citizen, that's a Perce tribal citizen. We are located here on the reservation in Idaho. We do have 3 communities within our reservation, and that is the Lapway, Orofino, Kamiai-Kuski areas. So within our ancestral homelands, we've had countless of bands at any given time. So there could have been 9 to 15 bands all across our Aboriginal homeland since time immemorial. And the reason that we use those words is because recently we've had archaeologists date artifacts back to 60,000 years, is how long the Nimiku people have inhabited this area. And these areas include a large part of the Pacific Northwest. Idaho, Washington, Montana, Oregon, parts of California, Wyoming, Nevada, even some parts up into Canada. And so the relationship that we have with our land is very important to us as Indigenous people. So when I first started the Nez Perce tourism research, we could say, it was very important that I visited some of these sacred sites, some of these sites that only my family knows about, some of the places that only the tribal folks know about. But the relationship that we have with folks who are coming into the cultural preservation field is extremely important. And we just thank you for being interested. Even if you want to be a part of it for your own personal historical significance and carbon footprint on this land, it's just important that all of us honor that if you live within the United States, you do live on Indigenous land from one tribe or another. Just in the state of Idaho, we have 5 recognized tribes. So it's just really important that we know, historically the land base and who occupied those areas. And it'll create a spiritual connection that you'll have even with where you live or where you work, or the rivers you drive by, if you drive by bodies of waters to and from work, or to go to your camping sites. But just know that if there's homes on those places or cabins or things of that nature, then you probably are pretty much sure that there had been Indigenous people in that same area, because the waterways, the confluences, those places are rich in resources, foods and things like that historically and still today. But yeah, so I own Nez Perce Tourism LLC, and we do such important work, not only within the nation, within our communities, but within our tribe. A big part of the work that I do is centered towards future generations, just because it's so important that our people know where they come from, they know who they are, and that they never lose that connection that was intended to be lost, not even just 150 years ago with the reallocation acts and boarding school era and things like that. And so it's so neat to be Indigenous, and it's just an important time right now where the world is just in my region, there's over 300 tourism companies who 90% of them promote Nez Perce things, whether it's stories, oral histories, places, people. But I am the one and only Nez Perce tribally owned and operated tourism operation in the region. So that is very empowering, especially being a woman. But yeah, I did see that through the market research that there was a need for this, especially with folks domestically and internationally interested in the Nez Perce specific, Indigenous voices and meeting the people. And so I did 2 years of market research from Lewiston to Canada to the Pacific Ocean. And I quickly realized that there are several segments that we can tap into as far as helping preserve and cultural awareness. So not only for leisure travel, but also for the folks who live here, both tribal and non-tribal.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much. I learned a lot already. And now we'll shift over to Stephanie, who is relatively recently retired from the National Park Service, but is still very involved working on contract for the National Park Service and also with projects for the Washington Trust too.
Well, thanks. I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation. I started out as a historian, writer, editor for the National Register, writing little synopses of National Register nominations to be published in a big red book. I retired as Associate Director for Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science. And basically, that portfolio includes all of the National Park Service's responsibilities in both supporting park cultural resource management, and there's 419 parks now, all of whom, whether they realize it or not, have cultural resources. And then the partnership programs, we carry out the Secretary's responsibilities under the National Historic Preservation Act. So that means working with state and local partners. In between, I held a number of positions, from working in state plans and grants on the original Secretary's standards to moving out to Seattle, which was the best move ever because it really gave me experience of working on the ground, which a number of my colleagues who started with me in DC had never actually done that. And I think that's an issue. But anyhow, it includes programs like the historic tax credits, the National Register. I was keeper of the National Register, National Historic Landmark Program, American Battlefields, the documentation programs. It's a long list. There are about 30 programs related to both parks and partners, as well as research programs. And the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training is probably not as well known as it should be, but it's doing and sponsoring cutting edge research on preservation. So now I'm enjoying working on an intermittent basis for the Park Service on fun things. I don't have to manage a budget. I don't have to deal with politicians. I don't have to do HR. I'm just working on the 19th Amendment commemoration and having the opportunity to work with the Trust and other preservation groups here.
Thank you so much. Awesome. And last but certainly not least, we'll move over to Allison Williams for a quick intro, which also has to do with the first question that we have. So go ahead with a quick intro, Allison.
Great. So Allison Williams, City Manager, City of Moses Lake, and I have only been here since January, the end of January. And prior to that time, the last 28 years, I was in the City of Wenatchee. And I started in the City of Wenatchee. I went to work for the Wenatchee Downtown Association, which at that time, a long time ago, way back in 1992, had just come into their Main Street designation. And so I learned how to carry out the Main Street approach for downtown revitalization. It gave me an all new appreciation for that sense of place and historic preservation. I worked for the Wenatchee Downtown Association for 6.5 years, and then went to work for the City of Wenatchee as community planner. And in going to work for the City of Wenatchee, I was embedded into the Community Development Department. And this is where you really learn how the work that you do in the built environment is translated into codes and laws that direct how we work with that built environment. And so as community planner for the City of Wenatchee, I helped get a certified local government program implemented, and both local and national historic district designations for our community. In my work in Wenatchee, I was doing economic development and policy work, and actually went to work in the mayor's office in 2005 and worked at the right-hand of the mayor in overall city management, which led to my recent move to Moses Lake. And I would say that in all of my experiences, from a young student looking at a career, entering into the Main Street world through the Wenatchee Downtown Association, and then entering into the city government world, the impact of historic preservation and the things that I have learned through all of those positions, the variety of ways that these skills can be used in various professional positions is impressive. And so I think of, when you're in the public realm and needing to do a public project and needing to do a Section 106 review for that public project to find out the impact on historic and cultural resources. Carrying out the governor's executive order 0505, which we had to do to look at the impacts of our projects on historic resources. And working through the process of understanding landmark designations and how those can impact how you can do a public project. And I think finally in my work in Wenatchee, we were working on a very large transportation project, which led us to develop this deep relationship with our tribes. Wenatchee is the meeting place of the 12 tribes. So the Colvilles and Yakimas both claim space there, and we actually developed this amazing relationship with our Wenatchee Pusquosa tribe in working through translating that presence into the built environment. And so I look at all of those on this phone call and the various interests, and historic preservation provides quite an array of opportunities in the professional realm. And so I'm thrilled to be a part of the panel today and answer questions. And it's had a huge impact on my life and professional career. So,
hey, thank you so much. Yeah, I think these panelists that we have represent a bunch of different avenues for applying preservation in different ways. So I'm really glad that you covered some of that kind of practical, on the ground, regulatory stuff, which maybe isn't quite as fun, but is really important and really valuable for protecting local historic resources. So our first question, which Allison basically already answered, was to kind of give a little bit of background of what led to your current career, if there were other positions that you held along the way. And I think, Stephanie, you kind of also described some of those steps along the way, but did you have anything else you wanted to add, maybe like the very initial entrance into the National Park Service and what that looked like? I know the Park Service has such a wide array of job opportunities.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, and although I lived and took swimming lessons at Minuteman National Park, I really didn't know very much about the National Park Service, but I was in graduate school during the bicentennial and had the opportunity to see the possibilities because the University of Pennsylvania has worked very closely with the Philadelphia-based celebration. What particularly attracted to me to the National Park Service was, one, the opportunity. I came from an interdisciplinary background, so with a cultural anthropology basis, but I was exposed to archaeology and historic architecture, geoculture, National Park Service working with the parks. And if you're a cultural resource person in a park, often you're the only person. Really, it's valuable to have that interdisciplinary perspective, not only with the cultural resource side of it, but also with the natural resources. And I think that I called the National Park Service as I was finishing my dissertation and said, how do you become a ranger? I think for people who are really interested in the stories and working with communities, both associated with parks or outside in ways as Allison described, and just any number of ways, it's really, really important to understand that you can make a difference in terms of how a community's quality of life is by understanding how acknowledgement, preservation of resources is really an important part of a community's overall quality of life. So I've enjoyed the fact that we have an audience of 300 million visitors a year. So we have the opportunity, if we choose to take it, of really reaching out and making clear stories that haven't always been told from multiple perspectives and through multiple lenses.
Great. Thank you. Well, I will go ahead and move to our next question just because we have some other stuff to cover, but I'm going to direct this one towards Stacia. And this question has to do with what skills and experiences have been the most valuable throughout your career, and what skills and experiences do you recommend that young professionals seek out if they're interested in something similar to what you do?
Okay, so thank you. I have a bachelor's degree in science and business administration from the Lewis and Clark State College, and also an associate's in hospitality management. But I made sure that I stuck with the science side of even my business degree, just because it was so important for us to be tied to the natural resources part of my degree. And then also, one of the things that I absolutely find the most valuable for the work that I do and the work that some of you do is making sure that we respectfully seek and asking for elders' input. So I did 2 years of market research before I started my company. And the most liberating part of that was definitely, not taking my phone, not taking a notebook, but authentically listening to the stories and the oral histories of my people. That time is extremely important, and it's available, for tribal and non-tribal people both. But also the Nez Perce National Historical Park, located here near Lapwai, Idaho, was a big resource for me in research as far as looking over particular beaded items, corn husk work, and things like that. Just being around and connected to some of those very old artifacts. And I say artifacts in a sense that these things are still very much alive. I have a dress that is over 200 years old that, my multiple generation grandmothers wore. And, every time I just study it, I can feel this special presence in its spirit. And so as we move forward in a good way, and knowing that we're all going to be doing or interested in this cultural preservation type of work, we can understand that my big focal point, I have 5 pillars that I tried to structure my work around, specifically in the preservation side. And those pillars include respecting our land, our language, our people, our past and our present, and then policies as well as protection. So it's very important that as we navigate through these lifeways, that we always try to ensure the protection of our sites and our information. Sometimes folks will ask questions and they might not get a direct answer, say from the Indigenous perspective, but we have to be mindful that not everything is shareable. There's some things that are sacred. There's some things that only certain genders are shared. There may be stories that I've never heard that the male population hears. There's also things that are only shared during specific seasons. So the seasonal realms and our connection to Mother Earth, our landscape, is very important for us to be in tune with as well. So some of my favorite work is that of spending time with the elders, and then also being out on our homelands. And maybe it's even in my backyard, which I live in Lewiston, Idaho. Perhaps it's just being in my backyard and listening to, there was just a red bird, peopio. Peopio is bird and red is ilk that just landed on my roof. And it takes me back to the Lewis and Clark journals, and how much of a wonderful job and exquisite in description and sampling that Meriwether Lewis took on his expedition of 1804 to 1806. And I'm so glad that the other panelists had the opportunity to be a part of the bicentennial, because that's where I first started my love for, I guess, tourism. I think the love for culture is just, it's in my DNA, so it's always been there. But that's when I started to work with, the National Travel Council and things like that, because the Nez Perce tribe was approached 10 years prior to the bicentennial, which is a 200th commemoration of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And out of the 15 signature events, the Nez Perce tribe said yes to hosting ours. There were multiple tribes who declined that invitation just because it's a very sensitive topic. When we were first approached, we were asked to be a part of a celebration. And then we quickly changed that language to commemoration, just because we all know of the hardships and the genocide that took place after the Lewis and Clark expedition visited our homelands. But we had a great relationship with them. If you go back and read our journals, also there's a book written by a Nez Perce tribal member, Alan Pinkham Sr. It's called Lewis and Clark Among the Nez Perce. Him and Dr. Steve Evans wrote that book, and it is a beautiful illustration and narration from the Nez Perce perspective. Mm-hmm. But the centennial, the 100-year commemoration of the Lewis and Clark expedition, that one was geared toward kind of the Eurocentric fair type atmosphere, and the bicentennial, the 200th commemoration, had a lot of the Native American voice. And so there's a few stories that I'll just share one real quick. So in the Lewis and Clark journals, it is said that we took some of the expedition members fishing for Nasoch, for salmon, on the Pucoin, the river, the Snake River. And I know the exact location that they dropped down because I've been to these places, and our elders brought us there. And so we're able to visualize and see these places that are guides. You know, I'm a guide, that are guides, and that's what we've always been very well known for: our hospitality, our connection to the areas, and our knowledge that we're able to share. And so we bring this expedition, probably about 6 or 7 guys, down to one of our fishing sites. And it's written in the Lewis and Clark journals that we took them fishing and then we stole fish from them. But on our perspective, the Nimipu perspective, we understand that within each of our bands, and I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, there's anywhere from 9 to 15 bands at any given time. Within each of the bands, there was also kind of responsibilities, whether they were chief or leadership responsibilities. But we did have a salmon distribution chief. And we needed to make sure during that time that the different folks within that band who inhabited that area were taken care of. So that's something that we've always done to our people, is we've always made sure our people are taken care of. For those who can't fish, for the women who needed the fish to sustain their families' nourishment. But on our perspective, it was that we had families to take care of before we gave the Lewis and Clark expedition all the fish we caught. So that's just another cultural value that we like to share and that we still hang on to today. So we always make sure that we as a community, whether tribal or non-tribal, that we continue to take care of each other. But those two things are something that, one, started kind of my career in cultural preservation, was the bicentennial, and then also making sure that I spend time with my elders and the landscape is what has connected me and grounded me the most.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Those are wonderful stories. I do want to maybe toss that question over to Allison, since you kind of work in cultural resources in a different way. What types of skills do you feel like are kind of the most essential and applicable throughout all the different roles that you've held in your career?
I think having a passion for research and asking questions about where things came from and what brought them here, and why are they here, and what are the influences. I think about the jobs that I've known that are a part of the work that I do. And so, you know, you look at it from the urban land use perspective and being a planner. Planners are researchers and finding out the background of that land use and putting the appropriate codes into place to preserve it moving forward. There's the volunteer on a Main Street design committee that is interested in promoting the preservation of a site through the programs and events that are put together to celebrate those places. And then there's the science and the analysis part of it that I've witnessed in the consultants that I've worked with over the years, who are members of consulting firms, engineering teams, tribes, others who have to do the analysis that's required to do the reports to put the projects together. So I often, people ask me, what degree did you get to have all of these experiences? And I have a BA in French and Political Science from Gonzaga University. And I have always said that that liberal arts background requires the ability to read, digest information, and present it back in a framework to move things forward. And I think of all of those students watching here today, that hunger for what made our place what it is, you can volunteer, you can find positions where that hunger will get you ahead into a position. So
Great, thank you.
Jay?
Yeah.
I wonder if I could add real quickly one other skill, and I think it builds on I think the most important skill that I learned was to listen and to step back. So whether it's listening to the elders in a tribe, explain why a resource is important during a planning process, or working as we do at Perce National Historical Park in preserving the resources and the stories that helping to preserve the costumes, the artifacts that are important to them, is learning to listen and step back and allow their voices to come through. And if there's any change in preservation that I've witnessed in my career, that's most important is that recognition that you aren't the best person to tell somebody else's story or to identify what's important. And it's important to keep that in mind at all times.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So I'm going to skip to a question from Manish. And that question is, 10 years from now, what types of roles related to preservation, heritage, and cultural resources do you think will be in the highest demand? So kind of in the vein of what Stephanie was saying, talk about kind of the changes you've seen over the course of your career, but also what changes you see coming in the future, and what ideas our young students should keep in mind as they look for careers related to cultural resources.
Well, that's a really broad question, so I'll keep it brief. This can be a whole class session. So preservation has evolved rather broadly from a more patriotic, architecture-centric, Eurocentric field, and it has evolved in time in the last 50, 70 years to become more representative, but we're not there yet. We have to be honest and admit that. So in the last couple of decades, we've also been a little bit more self-reflective and seen where we are now, what we've done fine, and the improvements that we can make. So I'm guessing in the next 10 years, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. So we'll continue working on making preservation more inclusive. So we would be better, we would be doing a better job in representing the histories and memories of all groups of people and letting them convey their stories in the way they want to, without fussing about the standards and parameters that we've created to professionalize this field. So perhaps some flexibility would go into that. I really hope that in the next 10 years we could revisit some of the founding mandates of sites and their contemporary relevance, because there's a huge disconnect between the two. A couple of examples that I'm familiar with real quick is the San Juan National Historical Park in San Juan Island, right? So the entire park is set up to commemorate a pig war that never happened, right? So there's an American camp, there's an English camp, because Canada at that time was part of Britain. And so these two camps are set up, and all they do, their founding mandate is to interpret a war that never happened, which is, from our vantage, it's a lost opportunity, because it's such a great site to interpret the values of international diplomacy, because the war didn't happen. So there were diplomacy at play, and how they worked out their differences without having a war, right? Similarly, in our state is the Whitman Mission National Historic Site, west of Walla Walla that you might be familiar with. It's a site of a former Whitman mission, and to cut the long story short, the Whitmans, the entire group was killed by the natives. So of course, the entire interpretation is, the site is to interpret Whitman's great work that they did, right? In which, from our vantage, one, they shouldn't have been there. Two, it wasn't such a great work that they were doing. And three, you need to stop portraying natives as savages that killed an innocent family, when in fact they were just defending their territory and wanting to keep themselves away from diseases and such. So to cut the long story short, so we hope that we would question the founding mandates and contemporary relevance. And one more point that Stephanie sort of alluded to is work. I hope we would work better with anthropologists, sociologists, and have this. We've been talking to them, of course, but have this integration reflect in the sites. Somehow it's lost in the site what we talk to anthropologists. So we lose social history, as you know, Jay. We've been working in the Beyond Integrity group just for this, to move the field beyond brick and mortar. So for all the progress we've made, our standards are still related to brick and mortar. So we reject sites that are clearly really important, have major social history, have interesting stories to share, but because the sites don't retain their brick and mortar historic integrity. So we've been making a dent through our group on Beyond Integrity. If we have the time, I can talk more about it, but I hope that we continue sort of questioning the existing apparatus that we've created, which kind of makes it easier for the histories of the dominant groups, particularly men, straight white men, to be memorialized. And for the rest of us, we have to suffer through that.
Manish, I have to say, when I came to the region in 1982, that definitely was the story being told at Whitman Mission. I really encourage you to visit again. The latest film is much more
better.
And the whole narration has changed to a clash of cultures, and beyond that, in terms of looking at all of the questions that you just raised. The second thing I want to mention, and it's really unfortunate, is that under the last administration, we spent a lot of time with the National Landmark Committee to work towards redoing the regs just to accommodate exactly what you're saying. That architectural dependence on architectural significance has been a tremendous barrier. And we actually drafted new regs. They are still sitting for comment, but they really emphasized that architectural integrity should only be in the forefront if you're nominating for an architectural significance, as opposed to stories like Our Lady of Guadalupe, which has minimal historic significance, architectural significance, but great significance in terms of the development of Cesar Chavez and the farm workers organization. So we were moving in that direction, and there's happy to talk more with anybody about where we were and where we're going, but I very much agree with your analysis of where we've gone, and there are underrepresented community grants that people can get to begin to document those stories. So,
and thank you for bringing that up. I didn't want to make it sound that we haven't made any progress. Of course, we've changed the language around interpretation. If you look at the memorial that is for the Denny party that arrived on Alki Beach, right? In the main memorial is just memorializing men, and the wives are not even listed by names. It's just wife, and the single women are listed by name, because when you were a wife, you didn't have that agency to be listed. And then, of course, the natives were not listed or acknowledged, So, but you have these plaques on the side, which later day plaques that actually list all the women because they, face the same hardships in getting here. So we're doing some of that, but like I said, we're still a long ways away to be fully sort of, equitable and inclusive.
Yeah. Thank you both for those really excellent comments. We have not received any comments from the audience yet, or questions from the audience yet. So if anybody has any, be sure to throw that in the Q&A box, not the chat box, so we can see that it's separate from the chat. But until we receive one, I'll just go ahead and keep on this topic and maybe throw it over to Allison from your perspective from local regulatory processes. Do you feel like there is a lot of room to grow on the local level for incorporating some of these broader themes and cultural themes rather than just the focus on the architecture and integrity there?
Absolutely. So, every city in Washington State has to have an overall comprehensive land use plan.
Mm-hmm.
And the state mandates the elements that are addressed in that. And when I was in Wenatchee, we actually added elements to our comprehensive plan, historic and cultural resources. We added other elements in regards to our downtown and our Main Street. And I think that every agency who is doing work in the public realm has to do an analysis of the impact of that project. And in this era, the impact is no longer just bricks and mortar. It is the socioeconomic impact. It's the impact to those communities that may not have a voice. And so as a public agency, we are more and more required, and it's in our best interest to actually not wait till it's required, but to take the steps to go in and have the conversations with the communities to understand who is in our communities and who is impacted by the decisions that we're making, and then bring that back and add that to our comprehensive plans so that we understand everything that we're evaluating when we're making decisions about land use and utility projects and where roads might go. I love the conversation about place and populations not represented. In Wenatchee, when we were working on the Confluence Project, which is a new egress out of Wenatchee, and we had the conversation about Confluence Park, where the 12 tribes met. There is nothing there that you can access that interprets the legends, the stories, the beautiful things that happen. It's a place where marriages happened. And that's not interpreted in that site. And because of our public project, those things were brought forward. And then it becomes incumbent on us as public officials to make sure that those stories are translated, are kept, are represented, and available for the public to understand the impacts that we have, and also to bring back the place in which to celebrate that, to celebrate who made us what we are. Why was Wenatchee a meeting place? And I'm relatively new in Moses Lake. We are entering into a wholesale update of our overall comprehensive plan. We have amazing history here. Although we were incorporated in 1938, we are on native land, and I can't wait to get into the process of translating that and having that verbalized through our plans that we then adopt in our public processes that we need to carry out.
Great. That just shows how important it is to have someone who understands cultural resources working in different levels of local government that understands the value and is willing to put the effort behind recognizing them. So Alex, I think we did get a question from the audience.
Okay. We did. And I will say this in advance. I know we're running short on time, but I do think it will be, I would love to hear all the different panelists' perspectives on this. So maybe we do lightning round. Everybody keep your answer to about a minute or two. So one of our attendees asked, what advice do you have for students and young professionals in regard to volunteering in the field as a way to build and or explore careers in cultural resources? And I would also add volunteering or internships. And Stacia, maybe can we start with you?
Yes, thank you. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. I love, love, love that our young people are falling in love with this line of work. It's so important that we have your voice. It's so important that our allies are able to speak up for us when we're not sitting at the table. But it does start with you just saying yes and making yourself available to volunteer your most precious sacred time. I mean, that's something that we can never take back. And just the mere fact that we're all here on this call right now is so important. I mean, we could be anywhere else in the world, but we've decided to commit ourselves to share knowledge, share the space. But some of the things that I thought was most important for me in volunteering is if there is a community event that promotes diversity, that promote something that may or may not make you feel a little bit uncomfortable inside, that's a challenge to yourself to say, you know, in the means of safety, of course, that may be something I should, one, check out. Some of the things that folks have a misconception is you're not invited to, say, per se, tribal events, whether it be a social gathering, a powwow, things of that nature. And in most cases, if you hear about them socially, you're welcome. All people are welcome. I know some folks want to attend, say, a powwow celebration, but might not quite understand the respect and norms and things like that. And that's why Nez Perce Tourism was established. So we could be that connection to folks who are unfamiliar with gatherings, that you would feel safe with a guide. But that's something that I would like for you to do, is check out local social gatherings if you're around. And then also always go to the Nez Perce National Historical Park. They have internship programs. So does the Nez Perce Tribe. They have internship programs for high school and college students also. And I believe the Umatilla does as well. So a lot of our Pacific Northwest tribes are seeing the importance in the future of our generations, whether it's tribal or non-tribal. But for sure, go and see if those positions are available. And most of them are paid, the ones that I had talked about with the Park Service, with the tribal folks. So we do need that young, ambitious voice who's willing to listen and learn. That's probably the two most beneficial things, is get involved in your community, the diverse side of your community, and just apply, and those relationships will build, and you will feel like you're a part of a new family. I know that when I even visit other tribal agencies, and then also working with, you know, city folks, officials, and things like that, they are just so humbled to be a part and just to gain access to this little bit of knowledge that we're sharing in the time that we have. But, you know, for folks who do become immersed in this work, you will begin to learn and walk in two worlds. You know, you'll be able to understand a world from the past, which is very powerful, and you'll be able to have a voice for the future.
Great. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, thank you, Stacia. And I think we'll, let's go to Manish next.
I've shared a couple of links here. If you're interested in starting out with preservation, I recommend going to the Cornell website, preservenet.cornell.edu. They have an internship tab there. They've also have tab for jobs. So that is, and it's usually updated. So start with that. But I would plug in for our own NICP internship, which is a relationship between, I believe, the National Park Service and the National Preservation Educators. And they have several internships, and I've shared that link as well. And these are summer internships. I participated where we were charged with documenting the cultural resources along the Lincoln Highway. You know, the Lincoln Highway was more a highway on paper, not, you know, on land. But there were multiple threads of different roadways that ultimately pieced together the first transnational highway from New York to San Francisco. So the three of us, the three interns, when I was in grad school, we traveled from New York, Times Square to San Francisco. And believe it or not, we put in 15,000 miles on the van
Wow.
because it was not a straight line. But it was so much more fun. It was a lot of fun, tracing this highway and documenting the cultural resources. So I would encourage you to look up the NICP trainings. One more training that you want to consider is our own Four Cultures, what we call it's a summer internship. We have a name for it, I'm forgetting. Equity intern or something. And yeah. Jen, do you remember, Jay, the name of the internship?
I think it's equity and diversity internship.
Yeah, something like that. But anyway, so that's a work that the intern helps us understand the past biases in the nomination processes and what the nominations have missed and how, or they have, not underscored in the write-up. So that's a work that essentially focuses on ensuring that the past nominations are more complete and what properties do not go through the landmark process at all. As you can imagine, as you're probably already familiar, of the 195 properties listed on the National Register, there's only one site that is associated with African Americans in Seattle, and only one with Native Americans, and that one got nominated during my tenure on the Landmarks Commission, the Licton Park, the Hidden Springs. So we're and here's a city that celebrates its Native connections, right? We take pride in Native imagery, but we're not sort of doing our best in documenting their properties. So anyway, so that's an internship that works on that. Sorry, we are running out of time and I'm still talking. Shut up.
No, that's so great. Thanks so much for sharing all those links. And for participants, we'll send those out in an email as well. Allison, very quickly, same question. What advice do you have for students and young professionals about volunteering and internships to build their careers and resumes?
I think they're critical. In my past experience with cities, we've hired many of our interns into professional positions that have opened while they've been interning with us. And I think of all of the Main Street organizations out there and other nonprofits. Many of them have boards or committees and they rely on volunteers to do their work. And it's a great place to get plugged in to find out the lay of the land, what is happening, and be able to get connected with someone who has a position. So a huge opportunity to volunteer.
Great, thank you, Allison. And Stephanie, same question.
Thanks, Manish, for the plug about the NICP-NPS relationship. NPS has a number of internships, cultural resource diversity internships, Latino heritage internships, the NICP and partnerships like the one we have with Washington Trust, with the youth heritage programs, which are great. But I think the bottom line is get as much experience as you can anywhere you can. Make those extremely dry guidelines, which will put you to sleep in no time. Make them come up by actually applying it to your own community. Document your own home, even if it may not make it. Get the experience of actually applying it to something substantive. Listen to your elders, to your parents, to your neighbors about how the community has evolved and what's important to them. I just can't emphasize enough how much doing it makes it comes alive.
And this is really an exciting time to be in preservation, because there's, as you know, there's a lot of energy. And the field has expanded beyond restoration. And now we're talking about preservation in terms of, we've always talked about preservation in terms of sense of place, but we're also talking about livability, equity, sustainability. So this field, we are intersecting with other fields. So you don't necessarily have to feel like, you do preservation 24/7. You can be an architect but focusing on contextual design and thinking about sustainability and livability in the context of historic preservation. So dwell on those overlaps, and you can carve a niche for yourself.
Take a look at the National Historic Preservation Act introduction. It basically is way ahead of our time, and its time in many ways, in understanding the connection between preserving our past, understanding our past, and all of the benefits that can bring to a community. I still take it for inspiration all the time, and I'm pleased to see that the understanding of what it meant has expanded, as Manish talked about. So take a look at that.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're past time, but I really appreciate all of the thoughtful things that our panelists have shared. I'm going to go ahead and share this end screen of contact information for each of them. And I think we're going to try to do a few more career panels like this in some different angles. Like Manish was saying, there's a lot of overlap happening with preservation right now. We're starting to realize how much in common we have with other industries, and that's something the Washington Trust has been trying to identify and relay to our audience as well. So that's definitely something in progress. So
perhaps maybe we can do it for 75 minutes instead of 60 minutes. 75 or 90.
Okay. Sounds good. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and end it here, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, Alex.
No, I don't think so. Thank you again to our panelists for your time. We really, really appreciate it. I'm not going to speak for all attendees, but this was super helpful and interesting to me. So thank you again. And I do also want to say, please, if you enjoyed this, please do follow us on our website, on our social media. Like Jay said, we're going to be doing more panels like this. And it would be helpful to know if this is something that is valuable to you. So please do let us know. And finally, please do consider making a donation to the Washington Trust so we can continue bringing you virtual programming like this and career support even while we are not together in person. So I'll put a link in to our website to check that out. And please do consider supporting and signing up for more updates because we'd love to stay in touch.
And just really quickly to plug in for our certificate program. If any of you are interested in the UW certificate program, please get in touch with me.
Great.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just going to say goodbye to everyone.
All right.
Thanks again, everybody. We'll be distributing a link to this recording within the next few days, so keep an eye out.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.